Joining me on set is Rémi Bourgeot. He's an economist and associate fellow at the French Institute for International Strategic Affairs. Thank you for coming in, Rémi. Here in France, there's been a heated debate about who can and who cannot work on May 1st, because May 1st is one of the most protected public holidays, isn't it? What can you tell us about that?
Well, we come from a situation with heavy regulations, which were also tied to a certain economic and social model, which is now challenged by the industrial crisis, deindustrialization, and the issues France has been facing, inserting itself within globalization with this overall crisis affecting developed countries. So there's a push to encourage entrepreneurs to cut red tape, but it's not really what is happening on the ground. So you see this kind of uncertainty, this mixed debates regarding regulation.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me was perhaps 2 decades ago. I was covering a protest here in Paris about liberalizing the labor market, trying to make it easier for companies to hire people, and they were wanting to push for this temporary job contract. And I was speaking to a protester, and I said, you understand that from a company perspective, this would be better for the economy. And he said, yes, I understand that, but we don't care. What's more important than the economy is the quality of life here in France. And that struck me as an American, where we have a very liberalized labor market.
Well, I think the labor market has been liberalized to a great extent, but not for everyone, but for younger workers. I mean, there's a lot of inequality in that respect, but there's been little effort in terms of bureaucracy and taxes. The weight of the bureaucracy, public administration on businesses is really crippling. It really prevents creations, startups and companies from operating, and it encourages also these large zombie companies, especially in the previous environment of low interest rates. So there's really a broader crisis regarding the economic model, the continuing trend of deindustrialization, which really weakens prospects for workers and companies alike, especially within the framework of the Eurozone. And you see that across Europe now also with this industrial crisis affecting Germany. So clearly there's a problem with the way the government is managed and public administration, but it's not just about magical recipes, liberalizing one aspect or another. There's really an overall problem with the economic model, the orientation that France has been following over the past 30 years, especially when it comes to the technological relegation, which makes for poor economic opportunities for workers and for companies. So you have this overall environment. I mean, everybody's talking about reindustrialization. It's become rather rhetorical in the past few years. There's awareness of how important this issue is, but everything is going rather in the other direction. And all these talks you mentioned from 20 years ago appear a bit cut off from this, deeper economic reality, really affecting the economic model.
Yeah, and one of the things affecting that right now, the war in the Middle East, these rising energy prices, and we know Europe's being harder hit than the United States. So every year we have May Day rallies where people want more money and better working conditions. Now they have an energy crisis. How hard hit is France or Europe?
Well, Europe is slightly less hit or less directly than Asia, for example, because it depends a bit. I mean, it depends less clearly on the Gulf for its energy supply, but it's very much affected by prices, also by the supply crisis in the end, which is really materializing at this point in the geopolitical crisis between the U.S. and Iran. And the thing is, it really relates to what we were mentioning previously in terms of the industrial crisis. This energy prices are affecting industries very badly, and really pushing that trend of deindustrialization from already extreme levels. So it's very preoccupying, and there's really a problem also in terms of policy strategy in that respect with this European system of prices, where electricity prices in France are somehow dependent on gas prices at the European level. I mean, natural gas prices, which doesn't make much sense for a country which has invested so heavily and successfully in nuclear energy over the past decades. So there's really a lack of vision and strategy to encourage industries to develop and to position themselves in new technologies. So that's really key. And the energy crisis is disastrous in this respect, because there's already an energy crisis from 2022 with the Ukraine war, which hasn't been fixed either on the geopolitical or economic front, and now this new crisis is having devastating effects on, and the situation was already very precarious, not only in France. You could see also in Germany, which is the industrial heartland of the European Union, all these disclosures and very large industrial companies making public statements about their difficulties.
At the top there, you mentioned that Asia was a little bit harder hit from the energy crisis than Europe. In Asia, we've seen some economic relief packages to help citizens deal with rising fuel prices. Is that sort of thing possible, likely here in Europe?
All governments are taking some kinds of measures, more or less targeted, depending also on what they can do on the fiscal front. But the fiscal issue is really binding here for a country like France and others in Europe with very high public debt levels. So there isn't so much they can do to really withstand the effect of the energy crisis. These are temporary and very targeted measures, but the shock is really there. And it's not just about prices that's really key. I mean, that was the first materialization. It was really in terms of prices for Europe, because it was not so directly affected, or less so than Asian countries. So there was the price shock, but now it's really also a matter of supply. You hear about shortages in terms of jet fuel, but it's much deeper. It's going to affect so many industries. And it's not just about energy. I mean, there's been also rising awareness of other critical components like helium, which are used for semiconductors to manufacture chips. So it's really propagating across industrial supply chains all over the world. And so all countries, especially in Europe, are going to be affected directly and indirectly through all these channels from manufacturing countries across the world, and especially in Asia.
And can you give us sort of an abbreviated timeline of these effects over the next 3 to 6 months, what we'll see? I mean, we have the cost of living, we have the cost of energy, we have some people are speculating about whether airlines will still be flying because of the energy crisis. How do you see things shaping out over the next 3 to 6 months?
Well, it's starting to be really bad at this point, because I mean, you have very concrete elements of tankers not leaving their supply, their point of supply. So it's starting to be really bad already at this point. And then you have all these second round effects that I was mentioning, from rising costs and shortages across industrial supply chains. This takes a little more time, and it depends, of course, on the geopolitical situation. I mean, with this hard-to-believe situation where Donald Trump wants to claim some kind of victory and impose negotiations in terms that are not so realistic. So if there's some kind of normalization on that front and reopening, even under Iranian control, that's not what matters so much to countries outside the U.S. at this point. There could be some normalization that would take several months already. But if the crisis goes on like this, with a closure of the Straits, with on both sides, from the Iranians and the Americans, it will get really, really worse in terms of not only of prices, but really of supply shortages across industrial supply chains, and also food protection. There's been a lot of mention of fertilizers, so it could have really devastating effects, even leading to famine in some countries or for some social groups.
Yeah, on this note, I just want to read you this quote real quick. It comes from the European Trade Union Confederation. They represent 93 trade unions in 41 European countries. They said working people refuse to pay the price for Donald Trump's war in the Middle East. As you say, it's unlikely that the U.S. will perhaps listen to all these concerns, but what should working people do? How could they prepare to pay the price for this war, which shows no end in sight?
Well, that's really the limit Trump is facing in this war. It's the economic cost for the U.S., but the U.S. overall is not so much affected. I mean, there's an effect of redistribution across the U.S., but it's a major energy producer. But still, it's affected through the effect on prices. For Europe, it's really bad already, and the U.S. administration has also to take into account this overall global situation with key allies also in Asia, which are really on the first line in terms of those effects. So that's what is supposed to put some limits on this strategy of brinkmanship on the part of Donald Trump to impose some kind of victory where there seems to actually be a military defeat. So it's very important also for economic partners of the U.S. to make it clear how embarrassed they are with this strategy, and you've seen a lot of statements on the part of European leaders, even the ones that are usually most aligned on the U.S. administration, especially Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, with furious replies on the part of Donald Trump. But there's really a very high level of tension, even among the closest allies of the U.S.
Rémi, thank you so much for your time. We have to leave it there. Rémi Bourgeot, economist, joining us there. Quick goodbye from the